I'm going to talk a little about fire, and it's going to be a little different than probably you're going to hear from anybody else, because they're going to tell you, what to do and how to fix your go bag and all that stuff. So there's plenty of information out there, and I didn't want to just duplicate what everybody else was telling you. First thing you have to do when you're going to talk about something is to step back a little bit. So Galaxy, I thought I was far enough back, okay. It's even a different galaxy, so I've really gotten far back. But so can everybody see this okay the way it's set up? Can you see back here? Okay, good. Next slide. All right, now fire happens everywhere. It's not just here. Here's the Parthenon in Greece. In the same years that we were having fires, they were having fires. And forget the global warming arguments. This all has to do with natural events. It has to do with not taking care of the landscape. It has to do with kind of ignoring the fact that it's been done so many years ago, so much better. And now today we're starting to relearn some old things. And so they had fires in Greece, they had fires in the tundra, they had fires in Alaska. This year they have a 1 million acre fire up in Canada. And it has a lot to do with the way that the weather is changing, but the weather is always changing, and of course we've kept fire out of a lot of places. Next one. Here's our Lake County fire. This is the most recent one we had, the ranch fire. And you can see the ranch fire burns pretty much the same way as it does in Greece. There's a reason for that, and that is because we're both Mediterranean climates, and we're both fire-adapted style climates. Our brush, our vegetation around here is all adapted to fire. You keep fire out, you can't do it, it's going to burn so that you can't stop it. And so we really have to get used to fire in a different way, and we have to make it our friend again. And so here it is in Bachelor Valley, right near a friend's home. And he bailed out, and he said, is my house still standing? And I was a supervisor at the time, and I says, I can get past the fire lines. I'll go check and see if your house is there. I did that for about 400 people. They had me running all over the place that time. But in any case, his house was doing fine. Here's what the problem is. This was Bachelor Valley, or right above it, the hills above it. These are the hills that burned. This was before the hills burned. And you can look at the brush and you can see that there's little pockets of trees that go up these little canyon draws, and then little different kinds of trees in different places. The rest of it's filled in with brush. That brush is fire adapted. It's set up so that if fire comes through, it's going to be the first to come back. It's going to be the first pioneer to kind of take over its ground and reclaim it. The more fire that comes through, the more that it's going to get ahead of everything if that fire is hot. And fires at a certain time of year will start to push that brush back because something else will come in before it can get started. It's called a pioneer successional stage, and if you're not careful about the way things happen, it will basically be a weed species from somewhere else, because we've introduced so many weed species into our background. So in any case, this is actually a very fire-adapted area, and if you're moving out in the country, you want to look around to see where you are, because you could be right in the middle of a brush field, and there are a lot of homes that have done just that. This is also the ranch fire. This is a little further up, and you can see that it's pretty well burned off. This is pretty natural. This ash that's in the foreground are what's called 1-hour fuels and 10-hour fuels. The 1-hour fuels are really flashy. That's your grass. So your grass is where the ignition starts. That will burn and it will spread the fire. The fire will spread into your 1-hour fuels. That's your brush, anything up to 1 inch. And your 1-hour fuels will kind of burn off like that. You can see, though, that there's a lot of pockets of trees that were not hurt. And that's because in the ranch fire, it was not as hot in some areas as some of the other fires that we've had since 2015. Some of those fires were extremely hot, some were not so hot, and this one had a gentle westerly breeze. It did not have the howling winds that say that the Valley Fire did. It had a howling wind, and the one that was really hot was the Rocky Fire, because it had a big inverse heat layer sitting right on top of it like a cooker. But this one was not. It ran through, and this is a beautiful landscape, believe it or not, that's going to come back very normal. It's relatively flat right in here, but there's some areas that are not so flat. You get higher up into the forest, and what's happened is they've kept fire out so long, and of course all they did was log and then replant, that the stems were too close together. And this stems per acre count for a native forest should be about 40 stems or less per acre. This has about 300 to 400 stems per acre, 10 times the density that it should have. When the fire came through in those mountains and came right up the side of the mountain, right off the back, this is on a ridge, it just ripped right across the top of the ridge. It killed all these trees, so there was really nothing left up there. And of course, later on I went back up and there was little things that were starting to pop up, and these were all invasive species. So we were getting a lot of broom started in an area that we didn't want broom. So now they're going to have to go through and alter that entire forest in order to get it to come back in a more natural style. They kind of learned their lesson, so they say. What they were doing wasn't so bad. They were actually, I'm a forester, so I was looking at this a little differently. What they were doing was they were planning it for a forest cycle where they would sell the trees. And they never did sell the trees because there's no market for the trees, so the stems per acre count was high, and it got caught in a fire situation and it burned off their forest. So now they're going to have to try to do a different style forestry for the Mendocino National Forest. Now here's this is a map that was done to determine what the erosion rate was going to be after the fire. Everything that you see in red is the higher level mountain or the steeper slopes, and that's where they assume that it's going to be the most erosion, and it will. Those erosion features will then go down into the streams. The streams will go down to Scott Creek. Scott Creek will collect a lot of other streams, and then it'll head for the lake. But you can see that there's very hot areas, and those hot areas are where the slopes are really steep. You get steep slopes, there's nothing you can do. And so what you try to do, if you were, say, Native American, something like that, you would try to burn them off as much as you could to try to get good grass seeds coming back so that you could harvest whatever it is that you like to harvest. And there's a whole series that I could show you about how burning changes the landscape so that you can live on it in a more friendly manner. But the natives already knew that. Okay, so that particular slide that you saw was right up in here, just showing that that was all highly erosion soils. You can see by the red line, that's where the edge of the fire was, and right here, of course, was the river fire, and up here is all the ranch fire. The start of the river fire is right here, and the start of the ranch fire is right there. So, both those starts, I visited them. In fact, I was at the ranch fire start within an hour of when it started because I heard the call. So I just drove out with the sheriff and met him there. I just happened to see the sheriff, so we stood there and talked. It was a beautiful fire. It was. It was a normally burning fire underneath the trees. The wildlife was running in a circle and getting out of the way. And it was burning exactly what I would call an ecological burn. Until it got to the top of the hill and the wind got behind it and got an old burn, a brush field burn, and it took off. And in one night, it went 9 miles. Could not get in front of it. And that old brush field was an area that should have been burned 10 years earlier. And it was from the Forks Fire. So if you remember the Forks Fire, they never reburned that, they never replanted it, didn't do anything with it, and of course, it took off and away it went. But all of these different streams that come in are going to collect that erosion and head for the lake. This particular area here burned on BLM land, and they did their erosion rating and found that it was going to be about a 600% increase in erosion based on their calculations. We never did get a calculation from the National Forest. Those are different owners, and they do things a little differently. Now, what's changed is always, this is what I like to talk about. What has changed? This is the side of a hill, and you can see the grass and you can see the oaks. And this, of course, right here and right there are live oak. And so this is a big canyon live oak, and this is a coast live oak. And then everything back in there is blue oak. And you can always tell a blue oak because it has a white bark. In fact, the blue oak is a species that belong in the white oak category. So that's kind of funny. Here's my blue oak, but it's in the white oak category. And why is it a white oak? Because it has white bark. A black oak has black bark, so it has nothing to do with anything else. It's a blue oak because it has a tinge of blue in the leaves. So you can look at it, and it's deciduous, and it loses its trees every year, and the live oak keeps its trees all year long. Leaves, thanks. Always need help, thank you. So she's going to keep me from being laughed at. Okay, so the grass is underneath all of this. What did I say earlier about fuel level? This is 1 hour fuel. These are 1,000-hour fuels, and some of them 10,000-hour fuels. Takes a long time to burn. I've seen oaks sit there and smolder for a month. That's what you want, a nice separation between your burn times, because a fire will come in, get in the grass, replenish everything, recycle the nutrients for the oaks and a lot of other things, and then the next time it burns, it'll do the same thing. That's the way it was in these areas. It's called oak savanna or oak grassland. And this is the natural changes in the environment has gone from a forested environment as the climate has changed to an oak savanna environment. And so if you don't burn it, then you're going to get a lot of brush underneath there, and that's not going to be a good thing. Here is what's happening. And this is just 100 feet away, looking in a different direction. This is oak, and everything else that you see up in here is gray pine. It used to be called digger pine, Pinus savanniana. And so this particular pine loves the fire. It gets started, and it'll start sprouting up amongst all of the brush field. And so now you've got brush, you've got pine, you've got your oak, and it's all bundled together. So if a fire goes through there, the oak level of canopy is here. At the same height is your pine. Well, if the pine burns, which burns very readily and very hot, it'll kill all your oak. Once you kill your oak, then you're going back to the brush field. The brush field is one that is a pioneer fire species. It will come back faster than anything else with regard to its quickness to come back. If I get a fire on the side of this hill, I'm looking at nothing but a brush field for generations. Hundreds of years maybe, because it's a south-facing slope. It took forever for that oak to actually come in on that hot slope. And now I'm going to kill it all because I've got something I can't control in fire. Back in the day, the Native Americans used to burn this all the time. Those oak didn't have that competition, and the whole hill was becoming oak savanna, and that's what's actually caused that. But now I'm going to lose the whole thing. And in order to have a burn up there, I'm going to have to go in, cut all that pine down, get it right down on the ground, and then run a nice low ground fire through there underneath the oak, so that it's nice and cool and I can restart the natural cycle. And of course, once all of this gets down next to the buildings, and you see this front right here, that's all grassland right up to the front. That will be a very hot front when it burns, and it'll blow embers onto the buildings. What happened now, there's another type of forest, and I need to mention that, and that's what your tall tree forest. So you're going to hear this every once in a while. People will talk about ladder fuels. Ladder fuel, this is the best illustration I've found. It was a tall tree forest. Ladder fuels is when you don't have the fire and you start getting these trees that are growing up underneath the canopies of your taller trees. Just as the little pine would have been very short and the oak would have been tall, well, once that tree gets up higher and it gets on fire, it's going to get right up into your oak. Of course, when it gets as high as the oak, it's really going to kill it. Well, that's what's going on here. You get a surface fuel is here. That's your short hour fuels. You got your 10,000-hour fuels up here. Now all of a sudden you got ladder fuels, a different kind of fire. The fire gets in the ground side. It goes right up the tree. It gets right into the canopy, and you lose the canopy. And then when the wind gets behind it, then you got the kind of fire that you had in the valley fire. It just rips down like a jet engine. Back east, they have the same kind of problem. This is taken from a drone looking down on top of the road. and you can see all of those canopies are all the same level, right next to the road. So if there were someone driving along this road and you get the fire in there, of course, that's going to be something that got right across that road into the next side. We got a lot of canopy fires that were blowing embers out ahead of it. And some of the satellite review, the people who were looking at all this stuff said, we got embers 7 miles in front of the burn in some areas. They were talking about half miles. When I first heard this kind of conversation, if by satellite view they could really see the spots going out ahead, 7 miles easily. Okay, here's the fire history of Lake County. This is, of course, your river fire, and here's your ranch fire over here. And here's the start right there. There's the start you saw earlier. Okay, now, this is the fire history over 50 years. In 50 years, we've had 103 fires. 103 fires is probably not as many as there should have been in 50 years. There probably should have been 200 or 300 fires. Just to give you an idea of the difference of what it should have been and how they kept putting them out much quicker than until they got big enough to where they couldn't handle them. And the ones that you see here are the ones that got so big they couldn't handle them. That's the only reason they got that big. They were out there getting on them right away because you're supposed to put fires out. Now, why did they have that fire policy? That's because you want to grow a forest for its wood to sell. You don't want to grow it for 60 or 100 years and then lose it to fire. And of course, the fire danger is higher because the canopies are so close together. So they wanted to get on them right away, and that was the Forest Service policy. It also was picked up by BLM and a lot of the people that moved back into these areas. They didn't want to be burned out, so they liked the fact that they were putting the fires out. But here it is, that's the fire history for 50 years. And of course, this is going to be added to it. This one is much bigger. And now let's look at it from the standpoint of since 2015. 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. That's what's depicted up here. You've just now replaced all of the burn areas of those lots of fires with just a few fires right on top of them, with fires you couldn't control. Because fire-adapted species have moved in, and they like fire because they can control the landscape and restart much faster. So you have to take it a little differently if you want to bring the landscape back, and you got to bring professionals in to look at how you can do that transition and make yourself much more fire safe, because the fires won't be so hot and fires you can't control. The first one that I saw, of course, had to deal with was the Rocky Fire, and that was the one that had the big inversion layer that sat on top of it. But I sat through all of these fires and worked all of them, went out and visited all the areas and tried to look at it from the standpoint of fire science and what we should be doing. But we have now burned, if you take the land area of the lake out, which is 60 square miles, and look at the percentages of what could burn, we've burned up 66% of the county in the last 4 years. So what do you do? I told you I would tell you how to protect your house. All you have to do is be on an island out in the middle of the lake and you're going to be good, right? Actually, not so much, because if you don't know how to build your house and you're going to get ember cast out to 7 miles, you could still lose your house even if you're on an island. That's why you have to understand a little bit of something about ember cast and radiant heat and ignition start. Now this house, I didn't show a house that was around here. This one is in a different county pretty far to the north. But you can see the burned out center here. And actually I went up there and I sat and talked to these folks. They had no idea how the fire got started, and they had no idea because they had done everything they thought they were supposed to do. And yet they still lost their house. The next one. Now this is a little different. This is also further up north. These houses right here were okay. These houses burned out. What happened here, and this was really a lesson, because we could see how the fire got started. The difference between the houses that didn't burn and the houses that burned was because the fire got inside. And you'll find that in most houses, they don't burn from the outside firewall in, they burn from the inside out. And talk to any of the fire guys, they say when they get onto the house, well, you can see the fire inside already. It happened over and over and over. This has a stucco outside and also has a tile roof, and they thought that they were good. Now what happened on this was on the other side they had a vent, and the fire, the embers got inside the vent. Once the fire got started, of course, it burned from the inside out. Now, here's the Institute of Business and Home Safety. They are an insurance-driven organization. They says, why are we losing houses? That's a big loss to them. They spent some money with some fire science people. This is a big warehouse. It's so big that they control the fire inside the warehouse. They put a house inside the warehouse, and everybody's saying this embers are a bad thing. And they says, well, let's find out how bad it is and if we can learn something from it. They blew embers at the same level, the same intensity that you will see in some of these fires. And those embers are now up against the side of that house inside this big building in order just to see and film it exactly what the problem is. And you can see right here, you see some fire along the foundation. That is the foundation plants. If you have foundation plants next to your house, move them away. Here's the same sequence a little bit later. This foundation plant is already burned out. This one's burned out. Another one's going on right here. And you can see what's happened here. The embers have now caught right into the gutter. And they get into the gutter, and then they'll start to burn underneath that fireproof roof. That was a fireproof roof. And it starts burning underneath the fireproof roof. And next thing you know, you've got something that's going to smolder. In fact, the fire people themselves may leave after putting a lot of water on your roof and around your house. They may leave and come back, and it'll be burned down. And this has happened more than once until they figured they've got to take a little more time and inspect these things. This is gutters. I don't have any gutters on my house. When I built it, I put in a French drain around the edge so to take the water away. Let her fall on the ground, take the water away. What you want is gravel as far out as you can get it, and 10 feet is minimum. And then if you can put it further, even better. But gutters, you're going to have to put a screen over it so that nothing gets in your gutter. No embers. That makes it a pretty small screen. You'll be cleaning those things all the time. So think about your gutters. Think about what products are on there that you need to look at. Also with the windows, your radiant heat could cause a problem for your windows. Embers do not cause a problem for windows if, in fact, you have nothing to catch the embers onto. So basically, you don't want to catch any embers onto anything. You don't want to put them in the gutters. You don't want to catch them up into the cornice, and you don't want to get them at the foundation. Okay, so if you have a wall right here, and you've got right here, you can see just barely, you can see the concrete foundation. It will drift up against that concrete foundation like a snowdrift. It'll sit there nice and hot right underneath the edge of your siding. And if it sits there long enough and there's anything for it to kind of help the burning, it'll start burning your siding. That's when the fire will actually take off and get inside, because when it burns the siding, it'll go in behind it as well. So how do you do that? I mean, how do you fix that? That's pretty easy. All you really have to do is you put a little metal edge along your siding to reflect that heat, and then it won't get started on the edge. You can use metal, or you can use concrete siding and just put the bottom piece of concrete siding so it wraps along the edge. The same thing for any kind of edge right here. If you have radiant heat that is bearing down on that corner, that could catch the corner on fire if it's flammable. So you take off your edges that are wood and you put on the concrete edges. So they have siding, you just make it, cut it 45 and put it up there. All right. Fire triangle, fire science, this is what you learn. It's all about heat, it's all about fuel, it's all about oxygen. Oxygen is going to be the wind, and if the fire is burning hot enough, it'll bring the wind in with it. Fuel is going to be all this too much fuel, it's going to be this fire-adapted fuel. And then heat, that's going to be the hot days that we're talking about, or any kind of ignition start. And there's 3 elements of fire protection that you need to learn. I'm going to give it to you real quick. The radiant heat from a nearby fire, any trees, brush, or houses. The further back you are from radiant heat, the better off you're going to be. If you can't get away from them, you got to think of in terms of radiant heat barrier. All right, so distance is good. The further back you are from your trees, that's good. You don't have to be back away from all of them, because one tree loses its heat. 2 trees, it retains a little more heat and you work off each other. 3 trees, not so good. So you better have those trees spread out. Take the middle tree out. Make sure that you've got a lot of heat loss. Everything that's happening, you want heat loss. It needs to go up. If it's going to have wind behind it, then of course it's going to come at you. So heat-resistant materials on the house, wherever it's going to be a corner, anything like that. I have a regular siding. I am not concerned about my regular siding. What I'm concerned about are my corners and my edges. and my windows so that you have the vinyl window frame so that it doesn't melt, fall out, all of that sort of thing. You want dual pane windows. So in any case, radiant heat is what you're trying to do. You're trying to think of it in those terms to keep the fire out of your house. Ignition source. If it's going to be an ignition from embers or it's going to be ignition from radiant heat, thinking in those terms, you want to remove the vegetation and the material near the house. Further back away from the house, much better off because it's going to be losing heat. Disconnect the fence and the deck from the house. In other words, if the fence comes in, I was driving around, I see them all over the place. The fence comes in and it hooks right to the house. Nail a board into the house, put that fence right up to it, well, keep the dogs out. Trouble is it lets fire in because it'll burn right up to your house and right up underneath the corners and get under the eaves of your house, and that's the heat you don't want going in the attic. So what you do is you move it back and you put something in that's flame-proof for that fence. So some kind of flame-proof fence, or in fact, you can just nail something on the side of the house so it doesn't burn onto the siding, metal, that sort of thing. Further back, better off you are. Disconnect the fence from the house, disconnect the deck from the house. I got a deck that comes right up to my house. I'll be putting cement boarding right around the edge of the deck so that if it catches on fire, it will not burn up next to the house. It will burn up till it hits the cement board. That's only that far away from the house, but that's far enough. I want to get it away from the house, even if it's 6 inches. And of course, one thing that you can do, little trick everybody should know about. Fire retardant paint additive. Yes, they make it. You put this in the material that you're going to spray on your deck, the oil, and every year when you do that, you add this to it. Now, it's a little expensive because it's 20 bucks per gallon. What's your house worth? So you just put this in the spray that goes on your deck, and you're going to improve the ability for the deck not to catch fire quite a bit. And what it does, by the way, you could add to the paint for your house so that when you paint your house, it will also do the same thing. Now, what's it do? Let me kind of answer that. I'm going to try to get through this and we'll answer all the questions. What's it do to the paint? It actually gives it a material so that the radiant heat, when it burns against it and gets it to a certain temperature, it will start it to score. It'll start to turn into ash. Ash doesn't burn well. And in fact, will reflect and be a good insulator. You've seen fire walkers walk across coals. Well, they're walking across the coals, the ash sticks to the bottom of their feet, and that's why they don't get burned. So you don't want to run across there because it scrapes the ash off. So it's all about how slow you walk across the coals. I will never try that. Protect from ember cast, big deal. That's how a house in a neighborhood burns down and the other houses didn't. It's because embers got into that house. You want to put screens on your vents, and you want to do it with an approved screen. A lot of times they'll talk about 1/8-inch screen, that sort of thing. Go and get yourself a nice screen that actually will, when it gets the heat, it will actually shut down on you. That's what I have on my, I did all the vents to go into the attic that way. And you can buy this screen material that's about that thick and it looks like a honeycomb, and you get up into the attic and you just zip it right in to place with some screws. And so what will happen is if the air coming in is too hot, it'll swell up and close down and keep everything out of your attic. So you want a fire grade roof, obviously, but you don't want some way for the fire to get around your roof by getting into your gutters and then going underneath, because that's all flammable material. It's the roof shielding that actually is fireproof, not the stuff that's underneath. And that gutter is a way for it to get underneath. No ember catch areas, so if you got any kind of cornice or anything that's on the top that can stop an ember under an edge, then of course you got a problem. So those are my 3 elements. You probably won't see it written down that way anywhere else, but they all do the same thing. They will actually go at it as pretty much the same way. Next one. So all of this is well known. All you have to do is get on the web, download it, start to look around you and say, uh-oh, I didn't see that. You know, so 30 feet is, you need to do something in your first 30 feet if you don't do anything at all. 30 feet. If you do something 50 feet away and you neglected the 30 feet, you didn't do enough. Start with the 30 feet before you go anywhere else. And in fact, I saw one fire expert say, we're at a conference with supervisors, and so we were talking about this, how close do you have to be? Well, 10 feet from the house should not have any of these foundation plants. It should be bare ground. But he said, if you're 50 feet, you can't do any more really to protect your house. It's 50 feet. The reason, and I go back to where we actually developed the rule for the first 30 feet, and then they moved it out to 100 feet. That first 30 feet was done in 1994 when I was working with the Board of Forestry, and we were traveling the whole state looking at different fire issues. And it was right when they had the Oakland Hills fire that everybody realized that you've got to get your brush back away from the house to give it any chance at all before you harden the house. So you're looking at it two ways. It's called the setback and the house hardening. And the house hardening is you're taking care of the house by keeping the embers out of the house, by making sure that the edges are taken care of. But the setback has to do with keeping the flames away from the house right next to it. So it's only radiant heat you're dealing with, not ember casts. You don't want to have ember casts get in your house. So here's a friend of mine, the one that I went up to look for his house. He said, will you go up and look at my house, make sure it's not burning? Well, it was burning off in the distance. It was not burning his house. I said, you know, if you'd have gotten one ember, your house would have been gone, because you got 50-year-old cypress trees right up next to your house. So that these trees would have burned upside of the house, right into the attic, and right underneath his nice fireproof roof. So he said, uh-oh, I didn't realize, what do I do? This is all dried 50-year-old cypress. And it looked like it hadn't been watered in a long time. You can see this stuff's all drying back because of the drought. Everybody's saving water nowadays. Well, I helped him out. We took down the cypress, took them away to burn them. One match fire. One match fire. It went so fast that it almost knocked me back. Just dropped a match in it, whoosh, just like that. It was amazing how fast that stuff burned. Now, what he should do here is take out the foundation plants, and this asphalt right here, that put gravel on the other side if you don't want to add the asphalt. But you put gravel on the other side, and then you put an edge right there where the concrete foundation meets the stucco. And up here, you have to put screens behind it, 1/8" screen or smaller, or the special fire screen. And up here, he has no gutters, but he does back here. And so the gutters have to be special gutters so that the water will go in, but everything else will fall off, or take the gutters off entirely, because he didn't need them. So this guy asked me, what should I do about fire safety? Anybody have a clue? Oh, well, I don't know how many laws you're violating here, but I'll tell you what, the mice ought to be talking to you, because they're everywhere too. It was great mouse country. I had a better hint for his neighbor. Get rid of your wooden fence, because your neighbor is putting you at risk. So he says, really, what do I do? So what he did was he changed the posts. He had regular posts, but he changed them over to posts he wouldn't have to do anything with it, preservative. But then he put corrugated metal fence going laterally, so it overlapped in a good neighbor style all the way across. So the radiant heat from this burn, which will happen, will have some kind of reflector of the radiant heat away from his house. And he did all the other things that he was supposed to do. And that was only a 5-minute conversation. He downloaded it all because once I pointed out what he had sitting next to him, and this guy wasn't listening to me, then he went ahead and took care of his house. Here's one that's right. And this was in the middle of the forest where the ranch fire happened. Burned right through there. In fact, the road is right down here. You drive up a little bit further, and it's all burned off the side of the hill. And this guy had it all set back away from it. The trees right back in here, you can see that they're still green, but right over here, I should have picked up the trees that were burned, but trees were burned right over here. So he had, all this was gravel. There's nothing right next to his foundation. Foundation itself is well set up. There's a siding that'll burn, and yet he had no problem, and it was showered with ember cast everywhere in here. So there's Ready, Set, Go stuff everywhere. I brought a few with me in case anybody wanted. I did 10. If you want more, you can sure go online. And I also gave you some articles in here. There's 3 of them that I wrote, and the advantage of the articles is that they have, not what they say, but they have places to go online where you can get the information. You want to go to the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection's website, and you want to go to the Ready, Set, Go. If you were just put in Ready, Set, Go, it's going to have this come up for you. But if you were to look at this 26 points right here and check them off, it will make you a lot more fire safe. In Paradise, the homes that were built to modern fire standards, where 50% of them were saved. Prior to that, what they saw with homes that were not fire safe according to modern standards, 10% were saved. And that had to do with the way the fire went. And it was also true with regard how close they were to their neighbor. So you can build a hardened home, but you also have to have the setback. And you can find a way to basically come out pretty safe in most fires, and so that you can get out of Dodge early. And so there's one thing I wanted to leave you with, the Ready, Set, Go 3 things that they'll tell you about. Well, all the stuff that I mentioned. Right here, they're going to mention red flag warning. I wanted to mention red flag warning because on a red flag warning, there was something that it said that you should know about. It says, a red flag warning is saturated, that's not right, I can't read it, sustained. Wind speeds averaging 15 miles or greater. We get sustained wind speeds, right? 15 miles all the time. Relative humidity of 25% or less. Any kind of drought condition, you're going to have less than 25%. Middle of summer, you're sure going to have 25%. Where it really gets dicey is if you have 25% or less and goes into fall, where you get the high winds. Now you got the high winds and you have less than 25%. So you always hope for those rains. And then it says temperature of 75 degrees or more Fahrenheit. You can get that into the falls. You certainly can get it in the summer. We have it right now. And it says 10-hour fuel moisture of 8% or less for 1 day. So the question is, you all know what everything is up there except the final thing. The final thing was 10-hour fuel moisture at 8% or less than 1 day. Well, here's a 10-hour fuel. It's anything that's 1 inch, like this were a stem that's 1 inch, or down to a 1/4 inch. That's a 10-hour fuel. How do you measure it? You take 3 dowels that are standard. These are standard dowels that they have for this purpose. You dry them in an oven, and then you weigh them. And once you get a weight on those, and they have them standardized, so when you dry them under 100 grams, then you know that you got 100 grams of weight with your 3 dowels. You throw these out on the ground in different places, then you come back with little flags so you can find them again, right? And you take a measure, and you put it, there's a special scale that you get. And when that scale is over 100, whatever it is over 100 gives you percent. So now all of a sudden, instead of weighing 100 grams, it weighs 110 grams, you got 10% fuel moisture because that's all water that's going to be added to it. And that's how they determine it. You can do it yourself, and you can determine for the brush that are around you. And you don't have to make a hokey one like I did. You can actually buy these online. And the way that they do it, so they're not out there measuring all the time. When I was a kid in school, we did all the measuring, made our own. We made it out of wire. Nowadays, you don't do that. But there's special measuring that you can, springs that you can get will give you that exact difference. But you can also buy an instrument with 2 probes on it, and it'll do electrical conductivity right between the 2, and it'll tell you on a meter exactly what you have. And you can walk out there and do this on the dry limbs and everything and see what the moisture content is. But if you want standardized, it goes to red flag warning, then you have to use a standardized dowel. So that's what red flag warning is, and you can get all of this stuff that tells you how this all can affect you. Go online at Ready, Set, Go. It's really calfire.org, I think, and I think that's the last one. So the thing that we want in Lake County are not so many bad fires, but beautiful sunsets, because that's what we get when we have a lot of fires in the state, are some beautiful sunsets. That's the positive side. There you go.